How does a song get banned from radio, streaming platforms, and even entire countries? Because in a world where Lil Nas X can twerk on Satan in a music video, and Eminem has spent an entire career rapping about violence toward his ex-wife, you have to ask yourself, what could an artist possibly say or do that crosses a line those two never did? Sometimes it comes down to something as small as a single lyric. Rick Ross lost a multi-million-dollar endorsement deal over just 8 words. And then there are cases like Ice-T, where a song got pulled not because it was wrong, but because the people in power decided it was hitting too close to home. So, let's get into it. Songs that were banned, starting with none other than Kanye West, whose banned track became so controversial that simply playing it was enough to get others banned alongside him. Throughout his career, Kanye has never been shy about pushing people away. Whether it was his live television moment declaring that George Bush doesn't care about black people, or his later comments suggesting that slavery was a choice, the fallout always seemed to outweigh whatever point he was trying to make. There were smaller consequences along the way. After his pro-Trump positioning in 2018, radio personalities Shay and Big from Detroit's 105.1 The Bounce publicly pulled his music from their rotation. They were clear that it wasn't an easy call, acknowledging that Kanye was a core artist in their format and removing him meant cutting out a significant portion of their playlist. But whatever blowback he had faced before was nothing compared to what followed when he dropped HH. It marked the peak of what many now refer to as his anti-Semitic era, a period that began when he publicly declared he was going to DEFCON 3 on Jewish people and only escalated from there.
The thing about the red hat that drove me to a point of exhaustion, which was misdiagnosed by I'm not going to say what race, what people, doctor, and what hospital, and what media went to. We know I can't say that. It was a Jewish doctor.
Even after facing sanctions from virtually every direction, Kanye refused to stand down. For the lead single of an unreleased project known as Cuck, he dropped a track that openly celebrated Adolf Hitler and incorporated a greeting synonymous with Nazi Germany during the darkest chapter in modern history. The response was immediate. The song was banned across all major streaming platforms, with its availability ultimately restricted to X, formerly known as Twitter. Beyond that, in several parts of the world, the track wasn't just controversial, it was effectively illegal. The phrase used in the song falls under Section 86A of the German Criminal Code, which classifies it as an offensive and prohibited slur. As disturbing as the track was, people still found ways to hear it, and the reaction that followed was, to say the least, complicated. Alongside widespread condemnation, several listeners privately admitted that the production was difficult to ignore, that despite its deeply offensive lyrics, the song had an undeniable sonic pull that made it hard to simply dismiss. One reaction that captured this uncomfortable tension went something like this. "Bro, have you heard Kanye's new song?" "What? What is it?" "Okay, here's the thing. It's kinda catchy." And that's exactly the problem with it. Rather than distance himself from the backlash, Dave Bluntz, one of the men behind the track, chose to stand by it publicly, doubling down instead of walking away.
Yeah.
You for real?
Yes, sir.
Oh, yeah, give me some, bro.
Yeah.
That's a hard song.
Yeah, thank you.
It really is.
That's a good song, man. It's hard. So I made like a reference track, and then he made his version of it. But when I made that, I felt like Oppenheimer. This is like, what did I just do? We're gonna win the war, but it's like, at what cost?
Once the song was out in the world, the debate refused to die down. Some commentators argued that banning it would only make it more appealing, that the taboo surrounding it would drive curious listeners straight toward it. And in certain corners of the world, like Thailand, that theory seemed to hold up, with the track reportedly finding its way into club rotations. In the aftermath of being blacklisted on an international scale, Kanye attempted to rebuild bridges. He met with a rabbi and publicly attributed his anti-Semitic behavior to the lasting psychological effects of the car accident he survived in 2002. In a written statement, he acknowledged that his words as a public figure carry global weight and that during his manic episode, he lost complete sight of that responsibility. He credited a structured routine of medication, therapy, exercise, and clean living with helping him find stability, and said he was pouring his energy back into meaningful creative work. He wasn't asking for a free pass, but he was asking for patience while he found his way back. Despite releasing a reworked version of the track titled Hallelujah, the public wasn't in a forgiving mood. He has since been blocked from entering Great Britain, despite having previously headlined 3 nights at Wireless Festival, and has also been denied entry into Australia, France, and Poland, among other nations. But long before Kanye was getting turned away at international borders, there was a band whose music was considered so threatening to the establishment that their own government reportedly discussed having them executed for it. Formed under the direction of manager Malcolm McLaren, the Sex Pistols were engineered to provoke from the very beginning, consistently landing on the wrong side of what 1970s Britain considered decent. McLaren pushed back hard against critics who accused him of simply chasing chaos. That's an accusation by people who really don't understand what kids want. Kids want excitement. They want something that's going to transform what is basically a very boring life for them right now. And when frontman Johnny Rotten was asked about the punk label being attached to the band, he was equally unmoved. The press gave us that word. It's their problem, not ours. We never called ourselves punk. Seen as revolutionary by the youth and deeply offensive by the older generation, the moral panic around the group reached such intensity that they were forced to tour the country in secret, operating under the alias SPOTS, which stood for Sex Pistols on Tour Secretly. And because McLaren understood that controversy was its own form of currency, they pushed boundaries at every opportunity, including swearing live on British television at a time when that was considered completely unacceptable. Across the Atlantic, things were even more charged. Major retailers refused to carry their records, and there is widespread belief that the UK music charts were deliberately manipulated to keep their music off the airwaves during Queen Elizabeth II's Silver Jubilee, with a far more palatable Rod Stewart track handed the #1 spot instead. The Sex Pistols collapsed just 3 months after releasing their landmark debut album, Nevermind the Bollocks. And while the British establishment has since come around to acknowledging their cultural significance, Johnny Rotten has never forgotten just how close things came to a far darker outcome. There was constant pressure, but I got to write the songs I wanted to write. Then I had the media and the police force who did not appreciate it. I was discussed in the House of Parliament under the Treason Act, a law that carried the death penalty for words. In the United States, the fallout from offending public sensibilities has never quite reached that level. But looking back at how aggressively people fought against certain music during that era, it's hard not to feel like, given the power, they would have gone just as far. During the 1980s, the belief that rock and roll was actively corrupting young people was deeply widespread. Parents no longer recognized what their children were listening to, and heavy metal became a consistent target. Rock lyrics have turned from "I can't get no satisfaction" to content involving graphic violence and coercion. Some of it is encouraging unlawful behavior. Is music harmless? I don't think so. But the song that truly ignited the push to formally regulate music wasn't from a rock band at all. It came from one of pop music's most beloved icons, and it landed squarely on the wrong side of a senator's wife. Tipper Gore, wife of then-Senator Al Gore, purchased Prince's Purple Rain album for her young daughter. What she heard inside stopped her cold. "I met a girl named Nikki. I guess you could say she was a sex fiend. I did not feel that it was appropriate for my then 10-year-old child to have purchased. It just made us angry. We knew that other parents didn't know about it, so we thought we have to do something." After finding herself among the rare few who took issue with the Purple Rain album, Tipper joined forces with several other wives of sitting senators to establish the Parents Music Resource Center, better known as the PMRC. Their stated mission was straightforward: make sure that music buyers knew exactly what they were bringing into their homes before it reached their children's ears. The PMRC is a nonprofit educational organization with 2 purposes: to raise awareness about graphic content in entertainment and music and its impact on younger children. We were able to get the recording industry to understand a legitimate consumer viewpoint about how to distinguish in the marketplace between mainstream rock and roll and content containing explicit references to violence, drugs, sex, the degradation of women, thrill killing, and suicide. This campaign led to the unveiling of what became known as the Filthy 15, a curated list of songs the PMRC cited as evidence that regulation was long overdue. The list spanned everything from sexual content and graphic violence to drug references and occult themes, with artists ranging from Prince and Madonna to Black Sabbath and Cyndi Lauper all making the cut. The entire situation escalated to a formal Senate hearing, where most conservative politicians aligned with the PMRC's position, even as rock artists showed up to defend their constitutional right to free expression. In all candor, I would tell you it's outrageous filth. They may say they're not interested in legislation, but others are, and there's a real fervor to go even further. Out of that hearing came something nobody quite expected: the parental advisory sticker, stamped onto album covers to warn families about explicit content before it ever hit a CD player. But whatever the PMRC's intentions were, they accidentally created one of the most recognizable logos in music history, one that effectively told every curious teenager exactly which records were worth tracking down. Their campaign to protect the youth ended up working as the world's most effective advertisement. So their crusade against artistic expression largely backfired, but that didn't mean every artist walked away clean. There were still cases where individual songs and groups had to fight tooth and nail just to be heard. Miami-based Two Live Crew are widely regarded as pioneers today, credited with pushing rap into an entirely new level of explicit content that countless artists have since built careers on. But as is often the case, the ones who go first are the ones who absorb the most punishment. By the time they released their best-selling album As Nasty as They Wanna Be in 1989, Two Live Crew had attracted exactly the kind of attention they didn't need. Their lead single alone was enough to convince certain people that a parental advisory label wasn't nearly sufficient. Attorney Jack Thompson launched a full legal crusade against the group and their frontman, Luther Campbell, known as Uncle Luke, pursuing obscenity charges with everything he had. To me, Luther Campbell isn't Luke Skywalker. He's the Joker. He's peddling obscenity to children, and that is why I have to play Batman here. Thompson escalated the fight all the way to the governor's office, ultimately resulting in a ban of selling the album across 3 counties in Florida. But not everyone was willing to fall in line, including Uncle Luke himself. In 1990, a federal district court judge in Florida formally ruled that certain Two Live Crew songs were legally obscene and could not be sold or performed within those 3 Florida counties. My reaction was, are these people crazy? Adults should be able to listen to whatever they want. That's free speech. If performers do things that outrage the people in a community, this is probably going to happen. Law enforcement took it a step further, sending officers undercover to Two Live Crew performances and physically arresting the group mid-show for performing their own music. What looked like a small, localized legal battle ultimately changed the landscape for hip-hop artists across the board. The fight Two Live Crew picked, and eventually won, created breathing room for future artists to explore explicit themes in their lyrics without the constant threat of criminal charges. If I don't take on that fight, if I don't go after it vigorously, then we probably won't be here right now. A lot of artists would have ended up locked up just for lyrics. We'd probably be living in something closer to a communist country. I'm proud of what we did. But that victory had its limits, because while the courts had drawn a line around artistic expression, there was one category where all bets was still off, and that was coming after law enforcement directly. When NWA first burst onto the scene, they hit hip-hop like a detonation, pulling back the curtain on what daily life actually looked like in the streets of Compton, California, and forcing the world to pay attention. Their debut album covered everything from gang violence to the relentless grind of trying to escape the neighborhood. But nothing they put on wax generated more heat than their perspective on the police, which ultimately gave birth to one of the most iconic and controversial records in the history of the genre. What most people don't know is how close that track came to never existing at all. Ice Cube, who wrote the song, explained that Dre was deeply reluctant to put it out.
I was like, I'm part of this department of the FBI, and we're very concerned with this record called Straight Outta Compton. You guys got a song on there called F the Police, and we think this song could encourage, people to go against law enforcement and blah, blah, this and blah, blah, that. And basically, we'd like it if you guys took it off the shelf, you know what I'm saying, to that tip. So, they call us up.
In the aftermath, they were called into the record label's offices, but it did little to shake them. As far as they were concerned, any attention was good attention, and the controversy was only making them bigger. Through every obstacle thrown their way, they held their ground, and in doing so, locked in their legacy as the most dangerous group on the planet.